November 6th.
Here we are.
We were following everything until almost 2 a.m. last night, or at least I was.
Yes, I think I went to bed around 1. I finally called it.
Yeah. And we have been following this election so closely this time, for sure, for me at least, more closely than any other. And one of the big reasons for that was seeing RFK Jr. join forces, first putting his name in the hat, but then joining forces with Trump and his initiative to make America healthy again.
Yes.
Which is your entire career. It's what you do. It's how you serve humanity. And one of the things I wanted to have you on here for was to talk about everything that happened with the Senate hearing. And we've been seeing so much, did I say that right, the Senate hearing?
Yeah, it was a Senate hearing.
Yeah, we've been seeing so much about what is in our foods, what's allowed in our foods in the United States versus what isn't allowed in other countries. So I wanted, first of all, to talk about the really optimistic changes that are underway with him being a part of this administration, because I did a little bit of looking at social media today, and it was like a lot of people are feeling doom and gloom. And I think there's a misunderstanding of what this administration is trying to do, a wild misunderstanding. And so one of the other things I want to do is give people like hope and excitement as to what's to come.
For sure.
For all of this.
For sure. So I feel super excited and super hopeful, and I'm having a hard time containing how excited I am, because to me, this election is such a representation of where we are at as a collective. So I talk a lot about this on my social media, but from a spiritual perspective, we're in what's called literally the Great Awakening. So different events over the course of our lifetime, which have gotten progressively more intense as we've gotten older, are designed to massively wake people up. Truly, when you say wake people up, it's like to your own power, to knowing that like you have all the answers within you. You don't need to rely on outside sources for information, that we really are divinely connected and united as one. And so this election really is a big piece of that. And the thing that I was most excited about is this whole push about make America healthy again. And it's been pretty fast. I mean, in the last 6 months, it's really gained a ton of momentum. And I can't remember the date in which RFK decided to join forces with Trump, but I feel like it was sometime this summer.
Well, it was right after the assassination attempt.
Okay, so that was July 13th.
Yep.
So it would have been sometime after that, but I think the Senate hearing happened sometime in September. I mean, that was really relatively recent for the election. And so just to kind of back up and give people some context about that Senate hearing. So there's a congressman from, I think he's actually a senator from Wisconsin. And I want to say his name is Ron Johnson. I think that's right. I know it's Ron something. Okay. But he is the one who sort of orchestrated this whole thing to bring all of these minds, like-minded people together. And when I say like-minded, I don't mean from a political perspective, but really just we want to stop poisoning America, period. Like we have to do something about the fact that everywhere you look around, Americans are obese, and it's growing with children at a massive rate. The #1 category age-wise of humans in America who are becoming diabetic are kids. It's like, this is the most tragic, sad case. And if you took us back to the 1950s, it just wasn't this way. So then you start to ask, well, what changed? And what I think many people who are either frustrated with the results of the election or who could never get on board with the RFK Jr. thing to begin with, let alone once he joined forces with Trump, what I think they don't understand is how massive this is in terms of what this could mean for America. So again, going back to that Senate hearing, who RFK was able to bring together at that hearing were a ton of different specialists, let's call them, in their particular field. So leading the charge behind RFK was a gentleman by the name of Callie Means. And Callie had a very long history. I want to say largely it was at PepsiCo.
Yep.
And it might have been at some other organizations as well, but he literally was part of and an executive in the big food system. And so he saw the corruption at play. He saw the interplay between Pepsi and Washington. He saw that there were so many lobbyists that were literally putting all sorts of money into making sure that these big corporations infiltrated and influenced what was happening with government policy. So when you see something like, oh, the food pyramid, which is like such a freaking joke, I could vomit. You like turn the food pyramid upside down and that's actually what it should be. That's not that a bunch of really brilliant scientists got together and said, what does the human body need? What makes us thrive? What do our cells require? What is good for not getting cancer? What helps our bones grow, our muscles grow? There's none of that behind that food pyramid. The food pyramid is how much money came from lobbyists, got infiltrated into Washington, and ultimately influenced politicians to come out with the quote unquote USDA food guidelines. It had nothing to do with human health. It never did. And so that is like, I'd say going back, I mean, there's a lot of stories I could take you through that go back way before that, going back to, in fact, the late 1800s, which we can get into because it has to do with seed oils, one of my favorite topics.
We'll get to that.
But really, the Senate hearing was Callie and then his sister, Dr. Casey Means, who's a brilliant, love them. And when I first read about the two of them, I don't remember when it was, but I was like, oh, they're husband and wife. What a dynamic duo. And then I was like, oh, wait, they're brother and sister. Okay, just kidding. But they have a really interesting story because of the way that their mom died and how she was literally a failure of our food and medical system because she all of a sudden awoke at whatever age, 60-something, 70-something, and was on, like many Americans, all of a sudden 12 different prescriptions. And I don't know the exact number. I'm just throwing out a number, but literally wondering, how did I get here? And it's like, well, you had blood sugar, for most people, this is what would happen. You have extreme blood sugar dysregulation because you're eating way too much carbohydrate.
Yeah, so then I want to slow you down for a sec because I think this part is important. How the vast majority of Americans all of a sudden get on this litany of medications. So you say it starts usually with like a blood sugar medication. Yeah, and I should preface that by saying it could be a blood sugar medication or a cholesterol medication. Okay, like statin. So, and that's a statin. So the statins are pretty much the #1 prescribed drug in our country. And if people aren't aware of this, which I find a fascinating statistic, I tell my clients all the time, obviously you have to consult with your doctor. I'm not a medical provider. I'm a nutritional therapist. However, cholesterol is a nothing burger, in my opinion. I mean, and I mean that when I say that, I mean, I'm not concerned about high cholesterol, with a few exceptions. And I mean, obviously the topic is super nuanced. You don't want to have high VDL. I actually care way more about triglycerides because that number is what is the number of amount of fat in your blood. And a triglyceride is simply a metric of tri, so 3, triangle, 3, tricycle, tri, so it's 3 fatty acids. Tricycle. Tied. I got the tri. Tri. 3 fatty acids tied to a glycerol molecule. That's a triglyceride. So it's 3 fats and 1 sugar. And so that comprises blood fat, and a lot of people get really high triglycerides, and that's dangerous for a host of reasons, but largely cardiovascular. So most people, when they get into this, we call it polypharmacy, because they're all of a sudden on 6 medications, 12 medications, whatever the number is. They're on something for cholesterol medication, so it's to lower their cholesterol. That's going to cause side effects that causes them to go on another medication. That medication is going to cause side effects that causes them to go on another medication. So for a lot of people, it ends up starting with something like metformin to try to prevent them from getting diabetes and or cholesterol medication. If they go on cholesterol medication, they become pre-diabetic over time. Because when you go on statins, it dramatically raises your HbA1c to pre-diabetic and even diabetic levels. So now you have to be on a diabetes medication. Wow. And then those two things usually can result in having to lower your blood pressure. So then you might be on a blood pressure medication. Somewhere in the midst of that, either before, after, or in the middle, you're probably on an antidepressant or anti-anxiety because you aren't eating the right nutrients that actually feed your cells to be able to thrive in this world. Right. So that's just feel miserable. Correct. So, so that's 4 medications right there. There's usually a thyroid medication thrown in there somewhere. So that's 5 already. And this is talking about like literally the average American. This is many, many people walking around in our society are on some cocktail of all of that and more, or some combo of that and more. So what Dr. Casey Means was trying to communicate, or did eloquently communicate, I should say, she didn't try to, she really did at the hearing, was really what a major problem this is in our country and how so many of modern diseases, and I studied this in nutritional therapy school and talk to my clients about it all the time, so many modern diseases really start at its base level with some level of metabolic dysfunction. So it's a broken metabolism, which then
our broken Western medical system tries to fix with all these pharmaceuticals because doctors aren't trained on nutrition. I mean, Casey talked about that a lot. She's a Stanford-trained surgeon who did not have one nutrition class in medical school.
Not one.
Not one. So that's just a problem with the system.
Right.
It's not that doctors aren't good people. They want to do well.
Right.
But they're trained. If you come in with these symptoms, I'm supposed to give you this pill to make your symptoms go away.
Right.
It's never root cause. So he was there, she was there, Vani Hari, who goes as the food babe, was there, who's a major social media influencer blogger who I love. Jason Karp, who's one of the founders of Hugh Kitchen, he and his wife. Alex Clark, who's got Culture Apothecary podcast and who is part of Turning Point USA. I love her. Real Foodology was there. Jillian Michaels was there. Oh gosh, what's his name? Brigham Bueller, who has Ways to Well in Austin, Texas, was there. There were so many people there. I'm probably forgetting a few of them. But all of these people came together to give their varied perspectives on how the broken food system has either affected their lives, the lives of their clients, the lives of their patients, what they see in their families, and really making a plea to the Senate to say, it is time that we do something about this. And I give so much credit to all of those individuals because many of them were terrified. I've listened to all of them individually speak on podcasts over the last couple months, and they've talked about how scary it was. And oh my God, I don't belong here. And what am I going to say? And it went so well. So
I've watched the clips. They were amazing.
Yeah, I listened to the whole, it was like a 4-hour Senate hearing, but I listened to a lot of things on 2x speed, so I sped it up. But it was fantastic. I mean, everyone's testimony was so good and it was so unique, but there was something common about the message, which is our food system is broken. And, Brigham Bueller from Ways to Well gave one of my favorite quotes. He's like, our food system isn't broken, it's rigged. And I thought that was such a good point. He's right. Wow. Max Lugavere was one of the other ones that I forgot to mention. But so I feel like that movement is really what excited me about this administration. A lot of people, when I've shared about it on social media, a lot of people are like, okay, but really, how are they going to do this? And how is Trump going to do this? And, are they really going to make any change? And the answer is, if there's anyone who's going to make change, I believe it's RFK. It is truly his life's mission to do this. He has said publicly many times, he literally has gone to bed every night for, 25, 30 years, 50 years, asking God to send him away to be able to help and fix the obesity epidemic in this country and help children get healthy again.
It's amazing.
Isn't it? So I feel like the movement is so exciting. And, I know a lot of people aren't Trump supporters. They feel two different ways about it. What I say to people is just pay really close attention to where you get your information. Who are you listening to? How are you consuming your information? Are you doing deep dives on things, or are you just watching the headlines? Are you getting your information from mainstream media? Are you listening to long form podcasts where you can actually hear someone speak for 3.5 hours? Right. And some people say, oh, Kristin, I don't have time for that. Well, then just know if you don't have time for that, then you're not getting the full picture.
Right.
You can't be.
Right.
If you want to be an informed voter, an informed citizen, an informed parent, an informed member of society, it is, in my opinion, your obligation to educate yourself about these things in a long-form content way before you make an opinion about something that you truly don't know what you're talking about.
It's wild to me that people can make decisions about who a person, what their this candidate's intentions are, without ever really engaging in their speeches, the interviews that they've given.
Yes,
they're just getting sound bites and clips that have been,
cobbled together.
Taken out of context. I'm like, would you ever do that in real life? Would you ever, in your opinion, does a good person make a judgment about somebody else unless you give them the space to talk and you hear them out?
Right.
That's just, it makes absolutely no sense to me. And and then besides that, it is where are you getting your information from, and are you aware of how much censorship?
Yeah, make speech free again.
Yep.
Yay.
Shout out to House and Habit.
Agreed.
Fave. Where do you get your information from, and are you aware of how much everything was silenced in 2020? And
yes,
we were following so many doctors and physicians and all kinds of people who were being deplatformed on Twitter because they were going against the narrative. And fast forward 4 years, and it turns out what they were saying was right.
Yes.
So it wasn't even misinformation, it was inconvenient truths that clearly they wanted to silence them. And so that was one of my biggest pieces of awakening, which is what I want to talk to you about too. Is
Oh yeah,
just
for sure.
the process of awakening.
For sure. So on that point though about the silencing and the censorship, I basically at this point, if someone's being silenced, I'm like, I want to hear what they have to say. Because I believe whatever they're saying, or
Must
at
be a
least
good
there's
guy.
some, totally.
Yeah.
Must be a good guy if they're being censored. And at this point, it's comical to me that mainstream media or whoever the powers that be, government and otherwise, haven't figured that out yet, because it's, what do they call it? It's not the Dolly Parton effect. Who's the actress's home? There was some actress's home.
Oh, yeah.
The whatever effect. Barbara Streisand
Barbara
effect.
Streisand.
Okay.
Yes.
So the Barbara Streisand effect, when my basic understanding of it is that something about her home, she didn't want either people to know where she lived. Maybe she was selling her home. I don't know. Then everybody flooded to it because she was making a big deal that she didn't want people to see it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's what's happening with all this censorship.
Yeah.
So I'm like, who are they trying to silence? I want to follow that person.
Yes.
I want to hear what they have to say.
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not theoretical anymore. I mean, Zuckerberg released a statement. It's, why Elon basically bought Twitter, is he didn't want the censorship anymore. So, I mean, if people aren't aware of how much has been censored in the last 4 years, that is another roadblock to really engaging and understanding what this administration is all about and what their intention is.
For sure. And I would say the other kind of piece of it, just to have people help start to understand if they aren't, whether or not they're interested in this, just to start to sort of awaken, is follow the money, always. So I wanted to give you that seed oil example just in the context of the Make America Healthy Again, because I think it really helps to contextualize how all of this literally is about money. So in the 1890s, just to take, most people, unless they're living under a rock, have heard seed oils are bad, okay? So let's just say that first. What are seed oils? Well, Dr. Kate Shanahan, who wrote the book Deep Nutrition, which is a fantastic book, it is a tome. I had to read it in nutritional therapy school. It's massive, but it's very good. She's amazing. I love this woman. So she's written Deep Nutrition, The Fat Burn Fix, and now Dark Calories. So I've read Deep Nutrition, The Fat Burn Fix a couple of times, and I'm reading Dark Calories now, and so this is where it's gotten me more to understand the science of seed oils. So I recommend that book to anyone who wants to learn more about this. But in the 1890s, the main fats that people were using were tallow and lard. Beef tallow and lard. That's what people were using. And that is, the body understands what to do with it. The body knows how to process it. Our cells can communicate with that kind of fats. Right. It's got really good essential fatty acid profiles.
Straight from an animal.
Exactly. So then what happened is Procter & Gamble, which was around at that time. Now, Procter & Gamble doesn't make food anymore, but back at the time they did. So Procter & Gamble in the 1890s, there was this shortage of tallow. And they needed something to substitute for tallow to make their soaps. They made soaps, okay? I think they still do that.
Yeah, P&G.
Right, P&G. So they were short on tallow, didn't know what to do. And at the same time, there was this product. It wasn't really used that much, but cottonseed, okay? So cottonseed was a crop that they discovered that you could process. And if you got it to a certain, it has to do, I'll give you kind of the short summary. Procter & Gamble ended up collaborating with a chemist from Germany who discovered this way that you could add hydrogen molecules to this processing of cottonseed, and it was where the partially hydrogenated oil was born. So that came about in the early 1900s, and then all of a sudden Procter & Gamble was like, wait a second, we can use this, we can turn this into a lard or tallow substitute, and we can even start feeding it to people, even though it was a soap ingredient, because it had a similar consistency, but they had to overcome all sorts of processing issues and difficulties with it. Smelled weird, it wasn't the right consistency, so they spend all this time in the lab. So this is a chemical product that's made. It's not natural. There's nothing natural about it. And what was born out of that whole processing was something that most people have heard of called Crisco. And Crisco was then sold to housewives. Procter & Gamble got a huge amount of marketing. Their marketing company spent tons of money marketing to housewives to say this is a cheaper, shelf-stable, more inexpensive, healthier alternative made from vegetables, because they were using cottonseed in the processing of it, saying it was a vegetable that was healthier. And so Crisco took off like lightning. And they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. No, never mind. It has largely all polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are unstable, which our cells don't understand as well when you have them in massive quantities. And because this was a processed chemical compound that was made, our bodies literally didn't know what to do with it. So they made Crisco. Wow. Procter & Gamble ended up coming up with Jif. They've sold Crisco. They've sold Jif since that time. But that was originally a P&G thing that came out of cottonseed from a shortage of tallow.
I mean, I knew it was synthetic and it was made or whatever, but I didn't have all of that.
Yes.
That is wild.
And similarly, after World War II, in the 1950s is when soybean oil first came about, because after World War II was done, there was a big push after that where Americans actually finally started consuming more meat, more dairy, more eggs. And meat farmers who were producing cows had to keep up with the feed. And what they were feeding a lot at that time was something called soy meal. And it had soybeans, but it had too much fat in it. And so the cows couldn't process it. Now, keep in mind, cows are meant to eat grass. In fact, I was in Scotland in September. You've been there. I was asking on one of the menus, I was like, is this steak grass fed? And the guy literally was laughing at me. And I'm like, I'm sorry, did I ask a weird question? And he's like, aren't all cows grass fed? Like they wouldn't have a grain fed cow in Scotland. You couldn't find it.
Oh my God.
Because a cow's stomach isn't designed to eat grain. They're designed to eat grass. So anyways, sidebar. So they were feeding all the soy meal in the 50s. And what they discovered is it was making it so that the cattle couldn't digest a lot of the fat. So they discovered they could break the soy meal apart into soybeans and soy oil. And they were like, well, now we have all this leftover soy oil. Since now we're just giving the soybeans to the cows, what are we going to do with this oil? Let's figure out a way to feed it to humans. So they go through another, spend a bunch of years in a lab. And now it's like soybean oil is one of the most, it's literally, I'm pretty sure this is still the statistic, the #1 source of fat for Americans, which is so disturbing because it's terrible for us.
That's the one that's in most all chips and things, right?
Yes. Yeah. Usually you'll see vegetable oil containing canola and or cottonseed and or safflower and or soy. It'll say something like that.
Yeah.
And canola oil has a similar sordid history.
Right.
I mean, the Hateful Eight, just so people know, because I brought up Kate Shanahan, she coined the name the Hateful Eight. So the oils are, there's 3 C's, 3 S's, and 1 G.
Okay, so these are the worst 8 oils that everybody should avoid.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So they are cottonseed, canola, corn. So those are the 3 C's, cottonseed, canola, and corn.
Okay.
And then the 3 S's are safflower, sunflower, and soybean. And then grapeseed is another one. And I think a lot of people think grapeseed is a healthy oil. I used to think that before I knew anything. Grapeseed and rice bran. I'm sorry. Rice bran is another one. So I think I only gave you 7, so it's actually 8. So it's rice bran, grapeseed, and then the 3 C's and the 3 S's. And so just go to a grocery store and pick up a package and look at a box. Yeah. Guaranteed you 80%, if not 90% of foods have that in it. Triscuits, wheat thins, breads, everything that you and I grew up thinking is healthy has that stuff in it. And it creates a tremendous amount of instability in the body. So I'll say one more thing about this and then I'll shut up. Dr. Kate Shanahan, who again is the woman who wrote Dark Calories, when she first came out with Deep Nutrition, she and her husband were like, how can we get the word out about this book to everyone? So they sent it to the head coach of the LA Lakers. And he was like, he actually called her and said, I get books sent to me all the time. This is the first book I've understood that I've read about nutrition, and I want you to come in and I want you to program meals for the Lakers. Kate takes you through the history in the book about, in Dark Calories, she talks about after she started doing food for the Lakers, how they started to win championships. Then she was hired by this college basketball team, then this other NBA team, then this other, and it was literally like the inflammation left their bodies. They had more energy. They had better muscle development. They recovered way quicker. And Kate discovered this on her own because she was, I can't remember what age, but all of a sudden had a myriad of health problems. And her husband finally threw, and she was a doctor, practicing medical physician, and had massive inflammation in her body, all sorts of autoimmune problems. And her husband threw a book on her lap one day, and I don't remember the name of the book, but it was something about eating whole real foods. And she finally picked it up and started reading it and was like, oh my God, everything I knew about nutrition was wrong. You know?
Yeah, because we grew up with the upside down food pyramid.
Exactly. So just back to my original point about this, follow the money. So the money that Procter & Gamble made was never about Crisco's really good for you. It was selling you something. And I could make that exact same argument about what is happening right now with this whole transgenderism movement, which you talk about a lot because it affects children, which I think is so tragic, just like food does. But follow the money. The amount of pharmaceutical dollars and money that is spent on the pharmaceutical industry to gender transition one child is astronomical.
Yeah.
There is so much financial interest in that movement. So ask yourself, is it really that we all of a sudden have these kids that want to change their gender? Or is it something more sinister and people are programmed by propaganda? And the more and more people that wake up to what we've known for years, which is that you're being programmed all the time when you sit in front of the boob tube and just push the buttons and like zone out like a complete vegetable. It's so tragic. Like what is happening? People, I'm begging for people to wake up. And I say that. And then on the other side of the coin, I am very aware that I can't wake up anyone before they're ready. So what I hope is they listen to our conversation and they get inspired by something.
Yeah. And that we were on the other side of the coin at one point too.
For sure. Yeah. Exactly. Yep, we were.
And I want to talk about that too, because I think everybody has different stories of awakening. And what kind of are those like little flickers of, where you start to see, I guess for me, it's like you start to see everything differently.
Yes.
Really.
It literally is. There's a reason the saying is, when you became red-pilled.
Yeah.
Did you take the red pill or not? It goes back to the Matrix.
Yes, which I'm guessing you haven't seen because you're not a movie.
Do you know that I purposely sat my butt on the plane? I think I watched it when I was coming back from Scotland.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I know I watched it, but I was just trying to remember which flight, but I was in Delta. It was Scotland.
Yeah. I mean, I think most people are familiar with the scene, but basically he is confronted with, do you want to take a blue pill or a red pill?
Yes.
And the blue pill, he can go on living his life like everything's fine and normal, and the red pill, he's going to find out a lot of like how everything really operates, and it's going to be super uncomfortable.
Yes.
But he's going to be aware.
Yes, but then he's going to be awake to it, and then everything is follow the rabbit. I mean, that movie, which I think came out in 1999, isn't that right?
Yeah.
It was in the 90s. It was in the 90s, but it was so prophetic.
Yeah.
And it may have been written, I've never looked into the history of this, but maybe it was written by people who were very awake or who saw this coming. I don't know.
There's a lot of debate as to who wrote it. I've been on that rabbit hole too. So or like where the idea initially came from is what I should say.
Okay.
Obviously it was.
Well, you and I have talked about our awakening journeys many times over the years, but I would say that one thing I think we have in common, which I found so funny, is first of all, from a standpoint of awakening, as you start to awaken to your own real power, you start to realize life is an illusion. This isn't real. We're being programmed all the time. You know, to some degree, it's really rewarding when you get to start thinking for yourself, like all of that. One of my biggest pieces that I look back on now, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you really can't realize your awakening until you look back on things and realize how much you've changed. So when you're in the awakening process, I don't know that I was cognizant of it.
For sure.
I definitely know, okay, 2010 when I started Al-Anon, like these certain time frames. But for me, one of the biggest things was even after I bought my house, which was now in 2014, I was still at that time receiving Us Weekly subscriptions.
And what year was this?
So I bought my house in 2014. So for sure I was getting them in 2014.
Yeah.
Probably also 2015. And I would notice that I just wasn't interested in reading them anymore. Whereas if you had taken me back to 2008, I was like, when's my Us Weekly magazine coming? I can't wait to read it. This is so exciting.
What are the celebrities doing? Here's this person taking out the trash. They're just like me. I mean,
what's in their bag? The whole thing.
It's so cringy. And I was, same experience. I was several years behind you, but I remember even when Whitney was born, there's a picture, I'm like playing with her and there's Us Weekly open. So that was 2012. So, mine was definitely later, but I had the same experience where I started to see them pile up, and for whatever reason at the time, I just wasn't gravitating towards them anymore.
Yes, all of a sudden it doesn't resonate. Like,
right. And so for people that might sound confusing, why is that a sign of awakening?
Yeah, great question. So what I would say from my perspective on it, and I wouldn't say I didn't read this anywhere, but just my intuition is, as you start to awaken, you start to notice places where things are not in alignment anymore and where things are, where things don't resonate with you anymore and where things do. So to me, I stopped being interested in what celebrities were wearing, how celebrities were spending their time, who they were dating, who was divorcing. That became surfacey, small, and insignificant in my life. Not to say that someone who's interested in that, I am better than, I'm not saying that at all. And my interest just evolved into more deeper topics that were more intensely, they were just more interesting to me. So another way I would say I would, yes, I would say I would think about it is, you know, now I can see that I think there's a level of darkness to that part of the world, to that industry.
Because Hollywood's like Babylon, basically.
Exactly. So Hollywood Babylon is a real thing. People should read the book. I have it. But that darkness, as you start to become more awakened to your own light and the divinity within you, you're not attracted. Like, I used to be able to watch the scariest freaking movies. I loved horror films. I loved scary because I like to be scared. I like to have that feeling of like what's happening around the corner. You couldn't sit me in a room and you couldn't tie me down and make me watch it now.
Right.
I couldn't, because it feels icky in my body in a way that, like, the darkness, I don't like how that feels.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. I remember having that feeling, and that coincided with becoming a mom. I think a lot of my awakening happened as I became a mom too. Which
that's very common for women because it
blows your intuition wide open.
1000%. And you realize, by the way, I just created a life, and the seat of creation is literally in the womb space of women. It's in our sacral. And you just birthed a human into the world. And what else could I birth if I could do that? What else could I create?
Yes.
Why am I here? What's my service to the world? All of those questions are natural that women start asking after they have children, which is amazing.
Yeah, my human design is, I'm very in my sacral too.
Oh,
so
you are?
Yeah. It makes sense that would turn on
it
more
does.
clearly.
It's also your grounded, earthy Capricornness.
Well, you know, my chill vibes.
I know. I'm jealous. I need more of them, obviously. I love them.
So, okay, so the magazines, obviously.
Yeah.
What were some other, like, you know, signs of just like shifts in awakening?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I totally stopped watching television, which is obviously related to the magazines. So literally, when Dave and I were married, we had a TV in our bedroom. I don't have that anymore. I would fall asleep to Chelsea Handler's talk show every night.
All the time.
Oh, I was like, when's Chelsea going to be? I couldn't wait for it. Now I'm like, huh? I mean, we have a photo with her. I went to see her live in person, was so excited about that show. And now I'm like laughing. I wouldn't even want to be in the same room with her. Literally.
Right.
And I thought about like hiding that image on my Instagram. It's way down there. You got to dig deep.
I deleted mine.
See, I didn't because I'm like, it shows my evolution. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm like, look at my sleepy sheepy. Look at me. Look how cute I was then, you know?
Yeah.
So I didn't. I
just... It's just a lot of angry vibes I get from her, and just a lot
She does have a lot of angriness and a lot of darkness. She pretty much has full TDS as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
It seems.
Trump
I mean, I don't follow her. I also noticed that once I finally got Instagram, I don't really follow any celebrities.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't, like, none of that's interesting to me.
Unless they're famous for, like, help, you know.
Yeah, like, okay, Joe Rogan I follow. I guess you could be considered a celebrity.
Right.
So him and comedians I follow.
Well, so you talked about magazine, you talked about TV. Those were my same things too. Like, I had the TV on in the background all the time.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest aha for me is that I no longer felt the need to have these escapism type things.
Yes.
I wasn't escaping reality anymore because
Yes.
I started to come back into myself. Well, not back into, I should say, for the first time ever, but, you know, to my soul and who God created me to be. And it was like, I didn't want distractions. I wanted to sit with my thoughts. Things became exciting. Like, what can I create? What can I do? And I think that is true for most people I've talked to, is when they start to awaken and they start to figure out their unique purpose, what they're here to do, they don't want to involve themselves with all the escapist behaviors anymore.
Well, and also, exactly. So it's escapist behavior. And to me, after you get red pilled, you literally can't unsee propaganda if someone paid you $5 million to put on blinders to it.
Right.
You can't unsee it. I mean, I watch mainstream media now, and it is hard for me not to laugh at what they're saying and how programmed it sounds, and how it's almost like they're telling you, if you're literally looking at a snowman on the screen, they're like, it is the sunniest day. It's warm and there is no snowman here.
Right.
And you're like, but wait a second, my eyes can see a snow, like I can see it.
And I think that a lot of that happened too in 2020 when we were seeing the riots downtown. And there was, I mean, this reel went viral, but there's literally a newscaster saying it's mostly peaceful protests here in Minneapolis. And meanwhile, there's a giant building on fire in the background.
Yes.
And the gaslighting that we started to experience, and we probably had been for decades.
Right.
But that just was so overwhelming at that time. I don't know how anybody, we were literally being beaten over the head with it.
Totally. And so that incident is one of the big waves, they call it. I've heard it, depending on the spiritual teacher I've had, I've heard it referred to as purity waves. I've heard it referred to as like consciousness bumps. I've heard it, like there's all sorts of different terms that you could use for it. But just to give people some context, September 11th of 2001 was designed for our collective awakening. That happened to wake massive amounts of people up, and it did. It started an awakening for a lot of people. So picture it like an ocean wave coming across the earth, okay? And let's say it was an ocean wave that like you could surf on, but it's not super intense. It's like kind of a wave. Well, then we had the financial crisis of 2008. That was another one. So in 2012, there was the end of the Mayan calendar, which was another, there was also probably some other event that year. I can't remember, but that was another kind of wave that came across the country. In fact, that was the year I was divorced, which is interesting. So I was for sure awakening on some level then. And then of course, 2016 election was huge. 2020 election. And then before you even get to 2020 election, there was COVID. So I remember, and I've talked to clients about this a lot, but this is really interesting. I think I've told you this. In the summer of 2019, I was in a meditation mastermind with one of my primary spiritual mentors. And she's very prophetic in terms of what she sees coming on the planet and what she sees in the collective. And what she told us at that time, she goes, you guys, I don't know what it is that's coming, but all I know is if you take September 11th, financial crisis 2008, Mayan calendar, like all these other purity waves we've had come through, if those were a 1% bump in consciousness to help wake people up, whatever's coming is going to be like 5%. Like it's going to be massive. And of course it was COVID, right? She didn't know that. She just knew it was going to wake more people up than had ever been woken up in our lifetime so far, which is exactly what it did. Which is why, even though the election turned out the way it did in 2020, we had a complete swing the other way 4 years later, because there's so many people that have awakened in the last 4 years that they can't unsee the propaganda, the mind control. I mean, people are so done with celebrities telling them how to think. I mean,
especially the ones that have been. Okay, we have Cardi B, who was at the, Kamala rally. She's standing up there, unable to speak because she doesn't have her teleprompter. I don't know if you saw that. It was super
I did see it. And it's like, if you really believe in what you're saying, speak from the heart.
Right.
You don't need
anything.
No.
Yeah.
But it proves that they're all puppets of a larger regime.
Right.
Right.
And I shared that Lex Friedman quote on my story that you had actually pointed out to me.
Last night,
Yes. Just about the long form podcast and how important it is, or how people have gotten so tired of these, 1 minute interview where the host is speaking over the guest and they're cutting them off, and everybody just wants real, authentic conversations, and they don't want to spin anymore. They don't want like how the news is so crafted.
Yes.
And he was talking about how this is largely why the election went this way, is people have been listening to longer conversations that give far better context, that give us a well-rounded idea of the issues. And I'm hoping and praying that it's like the death of the legacy media. The mainstream media is like
1,000%. I mean, and it's interesting. Like I have friends and clients of all gradations of the political spectrum, and I love them all. For sure. And there is a big difference as to where people get their information.
Yeah.
Like, you can't listen to long form podcast after long form podcast after long form podcast and not be like, I wonder if what the mainstream media is telling me is actually true. Like, you can't. You can't, especially because my friends and clients are all highly intelligent individuals.
Right.
It's not like they're not smart. They could figure this out. They're just busy doing other things, watching mainstream media, getting the headlines only, and so they only know what they know.
Right.
But I feel excited because with RFK at the helm of this, getting back to the Make America Healthy Again, people have called him every name in the book. They have done so much to take him down, same with Trump, and it just proves that the light is winning. Like, this is literally a spiritual war of light versus dark, and it's that they are, I hate to say it, but I don't like the term good guys, bad guys, good, bad, whatever, but it's that they really, truly want unity. And for RFK to literally say, I'm going to leave the Democratic Party so that I can get a place in this administration.
Kennedy, a lifelong Democrat who is a Kennedy.
And then people call him weird and say he's an anti-vaxxer and he has brainworms. It's like, if you say those things about him, it proves to me that you've never listened to him speak, that you've never listened to a long-form interview with him, that you've never read his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, that you've never researched any of the lawsuits that he had where he literally has taken on and won massive litigation against big food and big pharma. I mean, this guy is a warrior with a capital W, beyond.
And that you basically just regurgitate everything that all the propaganda that you hear. If that's what you're saying, that he's has brainworm and anti-vaxxer, then you're just regurgitating. And being that we have a lawyer and a publisher here, I want people to know about the real Anthony Fauci, because if anything that he said in that book about Fauci was false, Fauci could easily sue for libel.
He could sue, of course.
Right. And
he would have been sued for defamation, and he's not.
Right.
He's not sued.
So for anybody saying the book is full of lies or he's crazy or whatever, read that book. That book could be such a big red pill for people.
I was going to say, I feel like that book was a big red pill for a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people awakened after reading that book.
Because it wasn't just Fauci's involvement in COVID. It was his involvement with the AIDS.
And it exposes the level and depth and intensity of government corruption.
Right.
I mean, it is at such a massive level that, and you think about all of the different efforts over the years, over the last decades, over decades before you and I were even born, between what I shared about Procter & Gamble and their marketing stuff, what big food has done with getting all these chemicals in the food, what the Sackler family did with the opioid crisis. And if people have not watched the documentary series, docu-series, Painkiller on Netflix, highly recommend. It's a must watch. You understand how sick and distorted people are that want nothing but money and power. And money and power, in the traditional sense of how we were all raised thinking about it, is completely dying.
Yeah.
Because money is just energy.
Yeah.
And there's enough to go around, and we can all have tons of abundance, and you don't need to hoard it all for yourself and not share it with others. It's very, very interesting just to watch how the world is changing. I think it's so fun.
It's so exciting. And for people to realize there's only one you, and you are created to be exactly you and no other version of that. And so when you can better lean into that, that is when you're going to not only be fulfilled, but serve humanity in the way that you were designed to do it.
Totally.
And I'm seeing so many more people doing that after awakening and saying, why am I, in this career or in this partnership or whatever it is that's toxic? It's not bringing me joy.
Yes.
And it's beautiful to see those shifts.
It is. And so that reminds me of, just in terms of that context we've been talking about awakening, or our own stories.
Yeah.
The other thing was me evolving out of the practice of law.
Yeah.
I didn't think in a million years I'd want to switch careers. I thought I was going to retire at that firm and die there, I mean, I thought that was my literal mission in life, was to be there. And then I started waking up, and then I started meditating, and then I started evolving. And I was like, wait a second, this is no longer aligned with my soul. My ego loved it. Yeah. My ego loved winning. My ego loved buying a fur coat. My ego loved having a Chanel watch. My ego loved being courtside at Timberwolves games. My ego loved all that stuff. And then all of a sudden that stuff became less important. And I was like, what are we doing here? This isn't interesting to me anymore. Now what's interesting to me is having deep conversations with people, listening to long-form podcasts where I can learn about, initiatives like Make America Healthy Again.
Yeah.
spending time with friends and family. Like it just, my priorities shifted in such a massive way. And I feel like that's another thing that people notice on their awakening journey.
Yeah,
you know?
sure. Priorities shift and they go back to really what's important and all the surfacey things.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember when you gave us your Louis Vuitton purses.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
and then I wore it, proudly for a while. But then same thing with me. I ended up gifting it to our niece because I was like, and no offense, I love,
Yeah, I still think brands are cool and
whatever.
It's fun to get bags once in a while and that kind of thing, but it doesn't drive me in the way it used to. I'm not like, I just don't care in the way that I used to about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't symbolize anything to me like it used to. I used to think it was so significant and I just don't see it that way anymore, which is fascinating.
Well, right. And I think partly because when you feel so fulfilled in what you're doing in your career, in the way that you're serving humans, and the way that you're making connections, and how you're helping people, everything else just kind of loses its luster.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I don't need those things to actually make me happy anymore.
Right.
And before I needed those things to make me happy, which is wild to even say out loud, but it's true.
Yeah.
And it's not like I don't like getting nice new things once in a while, but it's not that same like brandy, need to have all the labels dripping and things from head to toe. It doesn't, it doesn't satisfy me in the way it used to.
Right. Yeah. And there's always like the things. I like sneakers.
Yes. Yes, you do.
I was wearing a different one last time.
I would too. I'd want to cover up those feet too. Sorry. Had to.
My size 11 shoes. I really should be a barefoot water skier, actually.
You actually should.
Maybe sometime soon.
I love it.
Okay, so we talked a bit about awakening. I want to...
I think one of the things I wanted to circle back to, if we could just briefly, is just in terms of how, like now that we have the election over, like what the how is in terms of what the administration is going to do. You know what I mean? Okay. I want to talk just a little bit about the logistics because people are like, okay, so they won, they're not going to do anything, they won't make change. I actually think because the Senate also turned Republican, so the Senate turned red. Yeah. And I don't know what happened at the House. I didn't follow that part of it. I could look later, but in any event, I think they're going to be able to accomplish a lot and get a lot done in terms of trimming tons of the fat out of government, allowing the government to be given back to the people, having us have more of a say in what's happening at the government level. I mean, if one more dollars of my tax money goes to Ukraine, I'm going to lose my mind. The fact that we don't have enough money going to people in North Carolina after Hurricane Helene, and we're sending billions to Ukraine. That's
we still haven't taken care of Hawaii.
I can't. I literally, it makes me apoplectic because our priorities, the priorities of the old administration, which is now going away, thank God, are so broken. Yeah. They're so broken. There is nothing serving us sending all of this money to Ukraine other than it funds the military industrial complex. It's giving massive corporations tons and tons of money because they profit off of us being at war.
I know, and they do it under the guise of it is our job to be big brother and help these other countries. And people buy it hook, line, and sinker.
It's a lie.
And putting the flags on their profiles, no judgment, because I understand the propaganda is really strong, but they're not there to help the Ukrainian people. They're just not. That's not their intention.
Of course not. And if you put a flag in your bio, it's a sign to me that you've bought the propaganda hook, line, and sinker. I'm sorry. You now are virtue signaling that you think you're better because you're waving a flag. It does nothing to serve humanity. It doesn't. Actually, I'm sorry. I go crazy about this topic.
I'm thinking of, I don't know, I think you've seen it, the Saturday Night Live skit where he is sitting at his couch and he's watching TV and it's like bad thing after the bad, the next bad thing. And he goes to Facebook and he like types in a flag or something and he shuts it and he stands up and he's like this. And the song's like, thank you, Scott. He saved the day. He solved all the problems.
It's basically about how insignificant these dumb little things that are shared. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true.
It's a lot of virtue signaling.
And I do remember I was awake at that point because when George Floyd happened and everyone was doing the black square for BLM, I never did the black square. I was like, oh my God. This is the biggest virtue signal in the world.
Look at Black Lives Matter now. They've shown their true colors. First of all,
okay, talk about what that is though, because
they didn't even endorse Kamala.
Right. But talk about the BLM thing, because a lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize that the whole organization was a total freaking scam.
Yeah.
It was a scam.
Yeah. No money from them ever went to Floyd's family whatsoever.
Yep.
The majority of it went to the trans community because one of the founder was.
And she bought a multi-million-dollar house in like Bel Air, somewhere in LA, with a bunch of the money she got, which is gross.
When they confronted her at her new mansion, she jumped on, which it was Candace Owens that confronted her, and she came up with a camera crew, was very cordial, very like nice,
respectful,
to talk to.
Yep.
The woman went on Facebook and did a live or whatever and was crying, was like, they're threatening my life and blah blah.
Yes.
I mean, the whole thing was such a sham. And that's the other thing too, is like when you start to awaken and you start to cut out a lot of the escapism things, and you don't have the TV on all the time, and you're more with your thoughts, you're meditating, you're sitting in prayer, you're connecting with your higher self, you start to see things very clearly of what's authentic and what's inauthentic.
Oh yeah, your bullshit meter goes on like high alert.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yes.
It really does. You can't, inauthenticity is almost like it's coming at you with a burning flag in front of it. Yeah. You can't miss it. Mm-hmm. And so then you feel repelled by it, at least I do. Yeah. I feel repelled by it. I feel like sad for it. I feel like scared of it in a way. I'm just like, I can't be around that.
Yeah.
And so, but unfortunately, because it's often guised in a propaganda sold to you as some sort of marketing package bullshit, people still buy it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
And I really feel like, I've tried so many times over the course of the last year to say, what is the big difference in society? Because I really don't think it's Republican, Democrat. I really don't think it's conservative, liberal. I think those labels are nonsense. I think what it really comes down to, I used to say, well, it's people who are awake and it's people who aren't, but I don't even think that's it. And I don't want to, I don't say any of this to like, quote unquote, shame people that aren't awakened yet. I'm saying this to say, I want to give people context to help them understand what the difference is. And I think it really comes down to, have you taken the red pill or have you not?
Yeah.
Truly. That's the difference. Have you taken the red pill? And so people like, if they haven't taken the red pill, they're like, well, wait a second, what's the red pill? What's this red pill? How do I take it? It's not physically taking a red pill, just to be clear. It's a slow process of awakening that you can't unsee now what you know. And I wish I could go back in time and be like, that's when I took it.
I know.
Do you know when you took it? Or is it like you get dripped little parts of the pill over time?
Get dripped.
Yeah.
I mean, it started for me when I started meditating.
Yes, that's true.
Vanessa session with Vanessa.
And
I started not long after you because you were, once you start, you were having so much like.
I was changing.
Yes. Yeah. So then, and then after that, it was just starting to come into my own a little more and like do more things that scared me. And then every time I did that, I was like, okay, it was like I was figuring out who I was and my path in this lifetime for the first time in my 30s. And then I think it was COVID that really kind of blew the doors wide open.
Yeah.
And we also had time to just like research. Remember when they kept saying, don't do your own research, or
was that in the whole like trust the science thing?
Yes, they'd like scoff at doing your own research.
Yes.
Which is scary and very Orwellian.
Totally.
But I was doing a lot of that, and I had time because I wasn't teaching. They had, closed the schools that spring, and just trying to make sense of what was going on at the time. So I was doing a lot of deep diving, and then one thing leads you to this thing, and then you start to, oh my gosh.
Yes.
You mean the FDA doesn't have our best interests at heart?
Totally.
It's like, oh my God.
And you realize that and you're like, wait, what? I can't believe this.
And so I think this is going to be a big red pill for people, just understanding like if anybody can walk through a grocery store and recognize that the vast majority of the food is in the center and it's all packaged and it's all unhealthy.
Yes.
And the stuff on the outsides are, less than, they cost more, but they're, they're not advertised, whatever.
Yeah.
And so if that can be the gateway, then people can start understanding, okay, well, if they didn't have our best interest at heart, and if they really are driven by money, how else are they showing up and doing that?
Exactly.
It's like everything.
And totally. And one of the things that this administration, I think, is also going to do, because it's so anti-establishment, is it's going to help us break the matrix. That's one of the reasons I was very in favor of this administration, is because I know it's going to help us break the matrix. So other than Trump, every other president for the last, I mean, certainly in our lifetime, for the most part, has been an establishment president. I think JFK was not an establishment president.
Right.
And that's why he was killed.
Yeah.
I think Ronald Reagan had parts of him that were anti-establishment, but ultimately he was part of the machine. But he was an actor before he came into the presidency. And I thought he was an amazing president. But he also had parts of him, as I understand it, there were parts of him that were still part of the machine, bought and sold, etc. But I mean, the Bushes, bought and sold, Obama, bought and sold, the Clintons, bought and sold. All of them are part of the whole machine, which a lot of people refer to as, you know, the elitist or the swamp or whatever.
Yeah, draining the swamp.
Yeah. And so because Trump in his presidency from 2016 to 2020 and now is the only anti-establishment president that we've basically had in our lifetime, it's just going to be interesting to see, now that consciousness has risen this much, what they're actually able to break. Are they able to break apart? Like, will we in the next 4 years finally get pharmaceutical advertisements off of mainstream media?
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to see.
Right.
I for sure love that inflation is going to change dramatically next year. Like, the inflation that has gone up during Biden's administration is horrifying, truly. And I think Trump is going to change that very quickly, which will be amazing. Interest rates will come down. The economy will get better. We'll start to work on the health. Like, there's no downside that comes to any of this. We're going to get out of all wars. He's going to get us out of all wars.
I know. It's so funny how people say, like, oh, here comes World War III. No, Trump's elected. And I saw, like, just a lot of fear-based thing. And I'm like,
wow.
People do realize that he kept us out of wars there were no new wars while he was in office.
Yes. He's going to get us out of Ukraine. He's got all of that.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Because he's not part of, he doesn't need the money from lobbyists that, you know, try to get all of the military industrial complex.
Yeah. And if people think that sounds sinister, that there's like literally people at the head of our government that want us in war because they make money off of it, wake up, people. Like, that's reality. We're not in these wars to be the good guy. That's not why it is. It is people making millions and millions of dollars profiting off of sending armed weapons to other countries. And in fact, I don't remember if this was on a Rogan episode or who talked about this. I'm sure you heard about this. But the amount of military weapons that were left, wasn't it, in Afghanistan? That Biden left in Afghanistan, or was it Obama? I can't remember.
Biden.
It was Biden that left in Afghanistan. And now they're using all of those weapons, our vehicles, all of that stuff. Now, let's just think about it. Why would someone do that? Why? Well, because then you have to make more and you have more government contracts and more money going to these military companies. It's bananas.
Yeah. And another just common sense point of view is like, okay, well, we have a lot of issues in America that we're not taking care of. The homelessness population skyrocketed. Yeah. And you look at the streets of San Francisco and Seattle, and it's horrifying to see. It literally looks like it's post-apocalyptic. And we had the funding to do that. We sent it overseas. So if people really think that they're doing this out of the goodness of their hearts and they want to take care of people, then why wouldn't they take care of their own people first?
Correct. Why wouldn't we be sending money to hurricane victims in North Carolina, to fire victims in Hawaii? Why wouldn't we be solving these homelessness problems, which, by the way, trending all in blue cities, okay? Blue cities, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, even now Minneapolis. I mean, it's a problem. It is thematic with how those groups run those cities. And I remember talking to a friend who was spending time in New York, who was walking and saw human fecal matter on the street in New York, which is now apparently happening more and more frequently there. And then guess what? I saw it in Minneapolis, in Uptown, where, oh yes, I was walking the dogs. I have never seen that. And I've lived in Minneapolis since 1999. And there are so many homeless people sleeping in corners of places in the city that has now infiltrated even Minneapolis. It's like, what are we doing? Why are we sending money to Ukraine? The money needs to be here to help our own citizens. It's disturbing. Yeah, speaking of citizens, we didn't even talk about immigration. but that's going to be another major change. You know, like I am all for people coming into this country.
1,000,000%.
This entire country was founded on immigrants. It's amazing.
Yep.
There's nothing better than allowing people to come here and find and make their home life.
Yep.
And if we are letting millions of people across the border, I shouldn't say many, I don't know numbers, but there's lots of gang members coming. Did you hear about the Venezuelan gangs that took over 2 apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado? And the mayor is like, well, at least it's only 2 buildings. We don't know what to do. It's like, you have 2 apartment buildings in your town being run by gangs from Venezuela, and you're not concerned about the safety of our borders? Like, what the hell?
And these countries have actually extradited.
Oh yeah, yes. It's like the extradition term, but extradited, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Many of their criminals and said, like,
yes,
you have to go there. You cannot come back.
Totally.
So when people say we are getting criminals, I understand that's not everybody. We have,
of course not.
But that is happening.
Yeah.
And they're coming over without any kind of
not even identification.
No, and the scariest part and the saddest part to me is that all of these kids are coming over and nobody's tracking them and nobody knows what happens.
I literally, I could cry just thinking about it, because the amount of sex trafficking that's happening with those children who don't have families or don't have, I can't even think about it actually. Yeah. It makes me sick. And people can watch Sound of Freedom if they want to learn more about that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, there's a lot of great podcasts with actual Border Patrol who share the realities of what's going on.
Yes, true. True. So we should probably end on a happier note.
Yeah, we should. I mean, that was
a little bit of a downer.
Yeah.
So hope with this administration.
Hope, for sure.
It's major.
Because one of my biggest things is the censorship, and without being able to just speak freely. And when I started to see them censoring, those physicians, like they censored the Robert Malone, the inventor of the mRNA.
Yes.
Technology.
It's like he invented it, and you censored him.
And he's telling you he's trying to tell everybody he never intended it to be used as a vaccination as they're using it for.
Yes.
And they silenced him and they deplatformed him. So there's never been a civilization that has survived censorship.
Yeah.
And it's why it's our First Amendment.
It's a really good point.
And so I'm so excited for the fact that this administration is absolutely going to push back on that. That Musk used billions of his dollars to buy Twitter, which X, which a lot of people thought was a waste, but he's preserving.
He's preserving free speech.
Yeah,
literally. I mean, I said my 3 most important issues with voting were: I wanted to avoid nuclear war or World War III. I wanted to make sure that we weren't censored, and I wanted to make America healthy again. And the only administration that's about to do those 3 things is Trump and Kennedy, which I'm just thrilled to support them.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Me too. And I mean, we've got 4 years to watch, so for anybody who's still in doom and gloom, I probably might have fallen off the podcast, not listening.
Right. They may not be ready yet.
Right.
Yes.
But give it time and see what's going to happen, because I'm so excited.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming. So fun watching the election with you last night.
I loved being here. Thank you for having me.
And wearing our matching hats. Thank you for those.
I love it. And then just the fact that we stayed up until 1, which is way past my bedtime, but it was so worth it.
Yeah, we're going on adrenaline.
I love it. Thanks for having me. Love you so much.